This is Popping the Bubble with hosts Sandra Ponce de Leon and Pete A. Turner.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chelsea Rustrum, and I'm founder of Blockchain for Good and also an organization called Blox, which does ICO marketing and advisory, what we call actually new economy storytelling. So we really center on what the story is of a particular blockchain company and build out marketing campaigns for that, for raising money.
Hi, I'm David Sneider, the CEO of Deconet, where we're building tools for distributed cooperative organizations to commercialize their efforts. And you're listening to Popping the Bubble.
You guys are awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming and joining us here on Popping the Bubble. We are here at The Vault, which is a full-stack innovation ecosystem and global network of startup accelerators and collaborative workspaces here in San Francisco, celebrating entrepreneurs globally. And it's a wonderful space. If you're looking for a place to be connected to Silicon Valley, this is the place for you. So with that, thank you guys so much for joining us, Chelsea and David. Chelsea, I know you through your work at Blockchain for Good, but you're someone I'm intrigued by, so I'm super excited to have you on and learn more about what you do and how you guys are working together. Maybe we could start there. What are you guys doing together? How are you guys collaborating?
So yeah, it's interesting. A lot of my forward-facing social media is about Blockchain for Good, and I talk a lot about community. And then I post some stuff about clients, but I'm not explicit because I work with very few clients and our team works with very few clients, and we don't really need to be outwardly facing on that. But David is a client and a friend, and we met actually super randomly. I was at one blockchain event and then went to another, and somehow we got in all sorts of crazy conversations, and it was just one of those sort of like late night things. And he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm doing this thing." And I was like, "Oh really? Like collaborative sort of ownership and distributed value?" I was like, "That's totally up my alley." And we started talking, and it just turned out to be a good fit.
Wow. Cool. Okay. So now I'm intrigued by you, David.
Yes.
Collaborative value. Is that what you said? Collaborative value and
I said shared ownership and distributed value.
Distributed value. Yes. What does that mean?
Yeah, first things first, thanks for having us on. This is great. For those of you who can't see, we all have wine glasses, and there's almonds and dip and broccoli. It's quite delightful.
Wine was requested, and I deliver.
It was requested.
A bit on the high level of our organization, we are working on enabling distributed cooperative teams to commercialize software and ideally, be able to enable the whole knowledge economy and pretty much anybody who works online. And what we see as the opportunity with programmable money is most people who work online, either as part of teams or as individuals, as freelancers or gig workers, basically work inside the salary-based paradigm, whereby an individual rents out their time on an hourly basis. And then, of course, they receive a salary based on the amount of hours that they've worked. And we see an opportunity both for individuals, but then more importantly for teams to basically tap into the paradigm of having some skin in the game with what they create, these creators, designers, developers, product managers. And what I mean by that is that them, as their creations are providing utility to people, they are receiving some income in a passive and sustained way. And we have a really good model for how this works in media. This is exactly how like a YouTuber creates a YouTube video, and then as that video provides entertainment or education or more generally just utility to a viewer, the YouTuber receives some of that income back to them. But then the opportunity with like blockchain and shared ownership is that they don't even have to depend on a big centralized platform by Google or YouTube, but the individual creators can actually own that digital asset. Yeah.
So like you could take something like a piece of code, like something created in a hackathon or an API or any size project, and that particular item could be utilized for passive income via what they're working on. So
yeah, the idea is that basically we now have a way for again, just to kind of come back to comparing the old paradigm versus new paradigm, the old paradigm, and largely if you think about it from a historical perspective, it's really kind of predicated on a time when there was one central person who owned land, and then people would come to that land to work. They would be paid a salary, and the reason that that person could pay the salaries out is they were like the de facto person in charge by virtue of owning land. But now that, like, for the purpose of digital creation, geography is essentially no longer a factor. We can rethink the model rather than having one person just kind of doling out salaries, and we have programmable money. So the four of us sitting in this room conceivably could agree upon how we want to split up the revenue that one of our projects generates. And then as people are purchasing monthly subscriptions, for example, to some product that we make, perhaps it's an app to figure out what's the best podcast to listen to, that cryptocurrency would be sent to us automatically in an equitable and transparent way.
Okay, so it sounds like it's also a way to encourage collaboration. Is that what you're thinking as well? That it's going to enable people to find each other, to work on projects together, and then share that income generated from those projects?
Yeah, precisely. I mean, we see in kind of like the existing knowledge in gig economy that there's a lot of people who are basically one-man bands, and they're like, I'm a consultant and I do exactly X.
Yeah.
But the things that are created by distributed teams, wholly distributed teams, rather than the gig worker, the freelance being like the on-demand talent at the periphery of the team, are not as complex as things that are created by teams. It's kind of obvious to say that groups of people create things that are of a higher degree of complexity than individuals. So that's the opportunity, is to get groups of people who are in this gig worker, freelancer, side hustle category, who can all contribute collaboratively together on something and then all have stake in its success.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
So say like a corporation said, hey, we need X, and we're willing to pay X amount for this solution, for the best solution. And 10 people who maybe didn't know each other previously get together to work on this.
Mm-hmm.
Each of them, the teams could develop on the fly, and then each of them could either have a piece of, the contest prize, which in this case would just be a prize, or they could have long-term ownership in the passive income from selling that particular project to other clients.
How do the teams get formed?
Yeah.
And is there an application process? How do I know that who I'm working with is, on the same level and on par, and people that I want to work with?
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot in kind of the abstract and generality. So just to kind of pull it into specifics. So our kind of beachhead industry, so to speak, is we're working inside the blockchain industry itself. Our clients are the biggest and best blockchain projects and foundations and companies. And largely the way that teams are forming today is we just basically have like a Slack thread, and it's very conversational, and it's very kind of like non-scalable, and people are feeling each other out and having conversations. And this is something that's going to be, frankly, very, very hard to productize, because on paper, two people could be totally, totally similar, but how do you actually work with somebody? That's harder. In terms of figuring out what the needs are, what the requirements are, that's a bit more possible. So it's like, okay, we need somebody who is skilled in this language, or a designer who illustrates in this style, or whatever it might be. Those parameters are easy to kind of spec out and post, and then people can essentially apply, right? Just because you have the skills, a team needs to accept you into their fold, so to speak. So the whole idea here, like overriding the whole project, is keep as many variables still as possible, and only change just the way the money is working. So how do teams find new people today? Well, it's in a bunch of different ways. And how do they confirm fit? Well, they talk to each other, they have interviews, they have coding tests. So all of that remains constant. And we're just focusing on what we believe to be the really high leverage thing, which is actually the flow of the capital.
Right. And the capital would be, do you have a specific token as well that people get paid in?
So we have a token. I can talk to some of those specifics. Basically, the token that people pay in, we're currently letting people like buy and sell stuff in Ethereum. We're likely going to be introducing a stablecoin, not our own stablecoin. We're going to integrate with somebody else's stablecoin to act as the currency of the network. Very briefly, our token has three purposes. Now, kind of getting to the specifics of the network, it is used for curation. We built something called a token curated registry, which is a methodology for a community to curate a list when there's no central credentialing authority. So in our case, they're basically curating what are the best software packages to use for a given circumstance. For example, like doing mobile development when you want to integrate Web3 or Ethereum. The other two aspects of what our token is for, one is staking. And there's two different staking parties in our network. One is like companies on the demand side who want to access developer resources. And the other one is we have this notion of nodes. We call them Deco nodes because our thing is called Deconet. And basically what these nodes are doing is right now they're just doing storage. So they're pinning data, which means like storing data inside the IPFS ecosystem. And then in the future, we hope that these nodes will be doing computation and basically function as the backend for applications that are leveraging our ecosystem. But what this means is that the network that we're building is like, because the fees on the network are being paid to these nodes and these nodes are staking our token, this network is totally sovereign, which is just like the coolest thing about blockchain, which is that if we disappear, it keeps going.
Yeah.
People, like, we have some like business moats and we have like a front end and there's things that you can only do like through our interface. But conceivably, anybody could just throw up another front end using the exact same infrastructure that we've set up because it's all free and open infrastructure. And it functions as this like self-sovereign network. And that's just the coolest thing, to have a model that's set up that's like totally self-contained and can grow over time. And then the people who are contributing value are gaining value in perpetuity. And then finally, the last thing the token is used for is that the token holders can set parameters, essentially governance. So like how much tokens should each node stake for the right to store data on the network. Rather than me deciding that number, the community can decide that number.
Yeah. Wow. And so how active is this community?
So we have a beta app launched on the Ethereum mainnet for people to buy and sell software and buy access to APIs and microservices. Our developer community is around 5,000 or 6,000 developers. And then kind of like the more general fan community is around 30,000 people who are just kind of like following along with what we're doing and are into it. Yeah.
Right on. Congratulations.
And you had a giant hackathon, right?
Yeah, we've been doing some virtual events with like hundreds of thousands of dollars in prizes. We're specking out running a blockchain virtual accelerator, which you and I haven't talked about yet. A lot of interest from our clients around that. More info on that soon. Yeah.
So you could think of it like GitHub meets Patreon meets freelancer.
Yeah.
But decentralized.
Right.
Which is crazy.
I think
it is crazy.
For me, it's...
Well, how do you make money, though? How are you making money?
How do we make money?
Yeah. Because if it's like sovereign and without you and can live without you in perpetuity, then...
Well, that's a beautiful thing about a token economy, though. I'll let him continue on that, but...
Well, there's two... Go ahead.
No.
Okay. Yeah, so the fee... Some of it is paid to the nodes, and some of it is paid for us for like putting in the sweat and making it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Cool. And so is it, because you said taking a stake in the game, or taking a stake, is that the proof of stake? Is that how it works in terms of the validation of the calculations?
the nodes within our ecosystem, so proof of stake is a consensus mechanism.
Right.
It's a mechanism for nodes to agree on what is it's basically a way for the nodes to agree on the ledger.
Right.
So who has what. We're building on top of Ethereum. So we're saying, Ethereum, you can handle that.
Okay.
However, if Ethereum breaks tomorrow, because we have this node infrastructure set up, we could run our own chain conceivably. If our network needed to handle that, we have the capacity and the system to set it up to do that. But for now, we'll just be like, okay, Ethereum, you handle that. The nodes in our system specifically are basically pinning data to IPFS. So they're just storing stuff.
And
so
IPFS is
yeah.
What's the acronym stand for?
It's the Interplanetary File System.
I love this.
It's so cool. So they've got their own people who just want to use IPF generally. There's something called Filecoin, which is the currency in which people pay for storage. Mm-hmm. But for us, because our desire is to create this sovereign network, the idea is that we don't use Filecoin to pay for stuff, but rather the fees generated by our network as its own entity are paying for the storage.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you imagine this being the future of work?
Great question.
Yeah.
Load it up. Block it.
I think the more exciting thing, the future of work is going to unfold. What really it motivates me every day is that this is the future of wealth, right? Letting people tap into this passive sustainable income. And I know there's there's a lot of people who are coming at this from a lot of different angles. Our approach is, knowledge economy, specifically on developers first, specifically on the blockchain developers. Within that, thinking very kind of like pragmatically and go-to-market-esque in that way.
Right.
But yeah, this is the thing that's so exciting in that the second order effects of letting people build wealth and breaking away from like being totally dependent on salaries are really amazing. Just for example, like right now, if you live in a small village and you are the smartest person in that village and you have a family that depends on you, you basically have one option, which is to like go to a big city and get a job there at a big company.
Right.
But if there's an ability, and then, maybe you send money back, and then there's this whole remittances thing, and that's a whole other thing to talk about in the context of blockchain. Amazing work being done there, not by us specifically. But if there's an opportunity for you to stay where you're at and build wealth there and keep your knowledge there and keep yourself there, that like the effects that ripple out from that are so exciting.
Not only that, but I guess to build on what you're saying, you could be anywhere in the world, whether you're in India or in San Francisco, anywhere in India or in San Francisco, and earn the same or a similar amount of money. Like your work isn't paid based on location; it's
Right.
paid based on quality and getting things done.
Huh.
So it's very different than the current paradigm.
Right. So is this going to then extend to like all knowledge workers? I mean, I'm a marketer. How can I tap into this?
So certainly all digital workers to begin with, to like at the very, very beginning, it's just for developers
Right.
as a proof of concept. But yes, I think the idea is to be able to build teams on the fly, to be able to work with all different professions that can be digitally accessed and share value across.
Yeah, this is really cool. Well, I actually just had an experience of working with a graphic designer on Upwork, and it was she was in India, and part of her profile said available like 24/7, which was not true. And
No
it was
one's
a
available
very
24/7.
well. I know, but I wanted her to be.
That's a nice idea.
And Hey everyone, this is Sandra from Popping the Bubble, and we're coming to you from the Vault in San Francisco.
What's the vault?
Well, thank you for asking, Pete. The Vault is a full-stack innovation ecosystem and collaborative workspace.
Full stack innovation, ecosystem, collaborative work. That sounds super techy.
Well, you're right there, Pete. Full stack means that in addition to being a great place to collaborate and network for startups, the Vault has a full suite of startup advisory services, such as fundraising help, legal, IP, and marketing services.
Let's also mention how the Vault works with corporations through Viz, the Vault Innovation Services, and VIA, which is the Vault Innovation Academy, which also offers courses in developing innovation at scale.
The Vault celebrates innovators from around the world and provides entrepreneurs with the right tools and support to grow better and faster.
This segment of Popping the Bubble is brought to you by the Vault. Thanks to Kevin and his team for all the amazing work they do to fuel innovation in Silicon Valley and across the globe.
But I wanted her to be.
That's a nice idea.
And it ended up being a very, unfortunately, negative experience. And I just like that. To me, one of the hardest things is the being able to suss out the right contact and like to look at their profile and say, okay, like I've never worked with this person before, but it looks like they know what they're talking about. I like the work that they've got on their portfolio, but then, it turned out to be this horrible experience.
Yep.
Right. And often the people that are really good get snatched up really fast. So that's another thing.
Yeah, it's certainly an issue that people have, like when they go and want to hire people offshore and do work in the freelance and kind of gig space from the demand side. What's really interesting is, one of the things that we're kind of building out is doing things on a milestone basis, whereby this person who you want to work with would say, okay, here's the totality of our project. The first milestone is something trivial. So it's almost like you prototype what it's like working together. And that way you're able to like kind of deepen the relationship. And maybe you start with like 3 or 4 people. You say, okay, these 3 or 4 people, we're going to see who's kind of the best graphic designer. We're really transparent. I'm working with these 3 people. Whoever can achieve the first milestone in the quickest way with the highest quality work, then that person can unlock milestone 2 and we'll go on and have a beautiful kind of professional relationship together. But yeah, it's really hard. I think the other piece that is a key thing here is like having the spec, so to speak. What needs to be done is like the main thing that makes it really, really easy to do remote work. If there's a consensus around what needs to be achieved, then everything else tends to flow a lot easier. So like there's a role on our network for people to basically approve or disprove if specs are high enough quality to hit the network. And in that way, we're ensuring that like quality work is getting done quickly in a reliable way.
Let's say I live in Mundelein, first off, and I work in an office processing paperwork. My job is going to be disappeared within 5 years, let's say. Maybe say it's 10, whatever it is. And I've got no idea what the hell you're talking about. Right. You know, like what are you talking about? And then the structure we're talking about where you are working for a boss. I've worked for a boss before. That person tends to say things like, Pete, what you're doing is not good enough, and I need more from you. And you're like, but I can add, and I know how much value I'm bringing in terms of dollars and cents, but you're telling me I'm terrible at my job. So that turns into like backbiting and disengagement ultimately, right? Mm-hmm. What is the person in Mundelein who has no idea what the hell we're talking about? What do they explain it to them, what this means to them? Like if their job is literally going to be gone in a short amount of time. Yeah, either one of you. I know it's a big question, but that's the thing is like this blockchain stuff, it's easy for us to go fast, but I want to slow us down a little bit.
I can break it down.
Yeah. We can kind of abstract up.
So my background, just for usefulness of this conversation, is in the sharing economy. So shared time, assets, space, and resources. I wrote a book titled It's a Shareable Life. So this is ultimately about sharing, right? It's about sharing the value of your work and ownership long term. When there are less jobs, it's about having value and compensation that pays you long term. Say there's a big buyout or a liquidation event that happens, a company sells, that you're a part of. Say you're an Uber driver, for example. Like, let's break it down even further. And instead of just driving and autonomous cars come into play, and instead of just driving and using your car and your time, the amount you drive and the amount of value that you provide to the platform or the network as a whole is compensated in the form of ownership. And also, let's take it a step further and say, you know, it's not 20 or 30% that you're paying in fees. It's 2 to 5%, you know, much, much, much less. So it's a way of creating a transparent network. And also, I mean, this idea of shared ownership sounds kind of like, oh, that's cool. That would be nice. Wouldn't that be nice? But it's so fundamental to the future. Because if we don't have shared production, shared value, and shared ownership, so many of us are screwed.
What about shared goals, though? I know, like, I used to be the number one task rabbit here in the Bay Area, and I dominated. But I was their front face, and that never occurred to them. So when they'd make tweaks to the platform or launch new products that I had to now validate and sell, they're like, no, you don't do that. And I'm like, what do you mean I don't do it? I'm talking to the customer. I could disintermediate and just pull you out of the equation and let the customer save, say, 15%, and I keep the other 15%. But so that shared goal thing, you get the problem of TaskRabbit didn't want to share with me. They would buy me cheese pizza, but I would go to the next startup.
Well, that's the problem with the entire economy, is that it's extractive.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Like we extract, like the way that like most businesses work is we either extract value from labor in the form of markup in labor. We're like, oh, like your labor's worth this much, and I'm going to mark it up by 50% and resell it. That's extractive in a way. The other way is we extract from the planet. We take, water and trees and precious metals, and we turn them into products and, many other things, obviously. That is how our economy currently works. What we're saying here is that if you can take that value and see where it's coming from and be transparent about the whole supply chain, whether it's the planet or people, it's really powerful and really beautiful.
Yeah, I'd say there's also this notion of of positive sum games is ultimately what we're after here.
Yeah,
too.
It's alignment of all stakeholders.
Totally. And to your earlier question about just what is this whole blockchain thing anyway, I think that's worth addressing to some of Chelsea's points, there's this kind of like the rallying cry of the millennial generation is access over ownership. And we're basically sitting here and saying that like, no, wait, maybe fractional ownership is better than access. Let's start to explore what that looks like.
So much, yes.
Interesting.
And so then the other piece on like blockchain more generally is that the internet gave us digital communication. And that's the big thing. We can all connect. You know, Facebook is one of the biggest companies in the world, all of these type of things. Now with blockchain, we have digital memory, and that's the big insight there. And we didn't have digital memory before, but now we have immutable digital memory. And this is a way to say that like, I put forth X effort and therefore I am entitled to a share in how this thing like, and how a given product or a given project, as it proliferates out in the world and provides utility to people, I can get some stuff back in terms of value.
Yeah. So ownership of the work that we're doing versus giving it to a company to own and capitalize on.
Well, yeah. I mean, the way we're going right now with not a lot of policy oversight, unfortunately, there's a lot of, in my opinion, you know, monopolistic practices, and we're like moving towards a future with fewer and fewer companies, let's just say. And if fewer and fewer companies have say over the work that's available, that's a kind of scary reality. Mm-hmm, so I think having value distributed networks kind of puts a wedge in that and pushes everybody to a new standard and says, you know what, Uber, you know what, Google, you know what, Facebook, you know what, everybody, like we have to share value. It's time. We can do it. It's possible.
Yeah, it's a whole new world is coming.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. It's kind of blowing my mind. Every time I talk about blockchain, it kind of blows my mind because there's just different paths. And you talked a little bit about programmable money, and I think that's super fascinating as well. Chelsea, I'd love to just like hear a little bit more about your journey into blockchain because I think it's super fascinating. And you've done TED Talks, you've written a book. Like, how did the sharing economy get you here?
It's funny, the whole journey, even when I like take a step back and I think about it, like how did I even end up like writing a book about the sharing economy?
Yeah, how did you?
I think just so many transformational experiences and human connection and realizing that, you know, giving and receiving were not so different. And that being a question in my mind and wanting to share that experience with others. So providing an opportunity for that by writing a book, by sharing that information. And then after I wrote the book, I was kind of like, this is like really weirdly like exploitative and like, ew, like all these
When was
companies,
that moment when you discovered that
honestly,
it was exploitative?
it was like right after I published the book.
Really?
Yeah. It took about 2.5 years to write to write the thing. And it was, you know, it shouldn't have taken that long, but it did for a number of reasons. And by the time it was done, I had such a different opinion and I was so ready to like, I wasn't sure quite what, but I was like, there's got to be something better than this. So I started asking a different question, which was, how do we integrate sharing into the very fabric of the economy itself? Mm-hmm. And when I started looking at that, I came up with some answers like, oh, there's, you know, digital cooperatives, otherwise known as platform cooperatives. Mm-hmm. There's equity crowdfunding, and there's blockchain over here, which I don't know what's going to happen with that. This was like 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? So I started, you know, running around doing talks about that. I was like moving from the sharing economy to the shared economy. And it felt half-baked, honestly, but I didn't know another way because it felt true also. So I was sort of talking about like lots of hybrid models and things to experiment with and ways of financing that were more community-based. And eventually a colleague of mine who I did talks with and who's written 3 books said, hey, I've got this ICO. Do you want to work on it with me? And we'd been talking about working together for several years. I'd been kind of experimenting around the edges of blockchain companies. And this was about a year ago now. And we just started, you know, and what I learned very quickly is that, you know, via token economics and programmable money and smart contracts and all these things, the things that I had been talking about for so long had finally come to some sort of fruition. It's not perfect yet, but it's such a step in the right direction. And it's so much easier and so much faster and so much closer to the ideal, of how society could work. But one of the things that I focus on, and that one of the reasons I started Blockchain for Good, is blockchain is just a tool. It's a technology, right? It's like anything else.
Yeah.
So if we don't program this thing in the right nature and we don't think about where we're going with this from an ethical standpoint and from a humanitarian standpoint and from a planetary standpoint, we're just going to rebuild the same thing.
Yeah.
We're just going to remap it all over again. And that's starting to happen to some extent. So one of my major initiatives with Blockchain for Good is to build a more beautiful world.
Yeah. Wow.
If I can dovetail off of that too.
I love it.
So stunning. And, to your point about, and these are kind of like longer term trends, right? If you think about how the internet got started, it was kind of utopic and user owned. And if people wanted to publish on the internet, they had their own WordPress websites and they owned their own domains. And it was like pretty distributed and sovereign, and individuals were empowered, and then moved over time over the course of
Except
15,
for
20
DARPA
years.
started it.
Well, I mean, just in terms of web publishing specifically.
No, totally.
Yeah, but now all web publishing happens on one single network, on Facebook. So we're definitely in this kind of like day in blockchain where it's still in that kind of WordPress user-owned day, but how I think what's interesting about Blockchain for Good and and the conversations that happen there is how do agricultural marketing cooperatives, like for dairy, the folks who put out the Got Milk ads, how do they come together and say, here's actually how we're thinking about our data sovereignty in the context of blockchain? Because if they don't start coming together and if they don't start participating in this conversation, there's the possibility that Walmart and IBM with their private blockchains come in and say, hey, this is the new way that you do business. And sure, there will be some benefits to it, just as if there's benefits to using Facebook. But then there's also this other conversation, which is what are the drawbacks of that? And like now is the time to start having those conversations in those groups for them to get ahead of that and really say, this is the way that we want to operate. And this is a difficult task. So like leading those conversations and kind of creating scaffolding to have a dialogue around it is vital.
So Blockchain for Good, I did a community event series for the sharing economy previously, and there were 60 events in roughly 3 or 4 years. I tried to dovetail the sharing economy community into blockchain, but it just wasn't the same community. And when I went to blockchain events, I was like, oh, there's like finance people, and there's some like libertarians, and there's some like crypto young people. And I wanted something different. I wanted a new dialogue and a new conversation. The conversations that we were previously having in the sharing economy were centered around what is value, how do you distribute it, what's meaningful, and how do we program the future? And so like that's the conversation that's been continued in Blockchain for Good.
Yeah, I love it. And I've part of the group, and also, just been fascinated and on my own journey with blockchain as well. And I mentioned Ben Bartlett earlier with you guys, but I love
social bonds.
Yeah, I love what he's doing and his concepts around the zero asset economy that we're moving into. I think is really in alignment with what you're talking about in terms of sharing in the asset creation, not asset creation, but the wealth creation and benefits from the assets distributed more widely and democratized. Yeah, so it's super fascinating. I love that blockchain is actually helping us actualize, the promise of all of these amazing things in terms of distributed wealth. And
it's kind of like the free market economy with value distributed networks and nodes, which I think people previously thought those two things are not possible together.
Right.
So I think it's also a remapping and a rethinking of what we previously thought possible. Is it socialism or is it capitalism? Well, maybe it's neither.
But what happens when, the forces that be, the power structures that are in place? I mean, like when they resist this, what's going to happen then?
I think this is like kind of
question.
The notion of, and this is like speculation, this is a hypothesis, but my hope and my hypothesis is that like at least, let's say in the category of the knowledge economy and the digital knowledge economy that we spend so much time thinking about, is that the current structure that's maintained by the powers that be, so to speak, is hopefully and potentially more fragile than it appears. And that when the people who are doing the work kind of wake up to the fact that there is a different way and see what was previously an unknown, that like it's like a cat's out of the bag type of thing. Bitcoin's the same way. Like the powers that be, so to speak, can't put Bitcoin back. It's out. It's proliferating. And so that is the potential here as well.
So I think this is going to come full circle. I think the United States is going to put the smack down, and a lot of this is going to become privatized and private blockchains and banks and whatnot. And we're going to see the day in the next year or two where there's sort of a cordoning off. But I think internationally, there will be safe havens and areas where this is legal, and people will either move there or invest from there or base there. And it's going to be an economic possibility for them, and that will in turn put pressure on everywhere else, including the United States, to open back up.
Yeah. So
I think it's going to be this like closing down. Okay, oops, that was too far kind of thing. And I think we're already starting to see that happen.
Yeah, totally. It's like, we haven't had any kind of economic downturn in 10 years. And in blockchain, it's pretty obvious that Silicon Valley and SF, which was this, beacon of innovation on the hill, so to speak, is not that way. This is totally an international thing that's happening in this industry. Like, you can just look at who's running the major exchanges to get a sense of that. And then, if there is kind of like some kind of economic downturn in the next 2 to 4 years globally, that when things come back up, I think things will even feel more and more flat and more globalized. And to Chelsea's point, like, I think I'm a bit, based on some of the kind of the conjecture that's happening from the regulators and at the federal level, I'm optimistic. I think there's like a cautious optimism, but I'm kind of a dogmatic optimist as it is. But we'll see how that shakes out.
So I just have one question before we get out of here. And, it's pretty big. And we probably need to have you guys come back and talk about this. But you're right. The power structures. Okay, sure. If we really believe in a decentralized shared economy, the government's role does diminish over time, ebbs and flows, that kind of thing. But if we're going to eliminate the influence of big centralized structures, it turns out the government's one of those.
Yes. And
it's very wasteful. So what happens as the power structures that exist don't want to lose power? I mean, do we lose stability overall? I mean, we're very fortunate here in this country to have a ton of stability for some crazy reason. We've managed to find a balancing point. But do we put that at risk, do you think?
I think that the government, what needs to happen with government is that the government needs to start seeing themselves as a service provider, just like the rest of us. And once they put on that mindset, then, you can even imagine a day where like governments don't take the fact that the smart people live in their country for granted, and they are competing for that tax dollar and this type of thing. So, I don't, it's a good question. It definitely requires some thought. Like, does digital money destabilize governments? Does privacy coins destabilize governments potentially? Yeah, absolutely. That potential is there. But I think that there's an opportunity for government to become more service oriented in that.
Oh man, this is getting so political.
Also to Chelsea's point, and I did some work with Blue Frontiers, which is building self-sustaining, sustainable floating islands that will be self-governing. And what they talk about is that you can, in the future, you'll be able to vote with your house where you want to live, so you can choose the government that is providing the best benefits to you. So I think that that's definitely an interesting direction, and what you were talking about with the countries that are going to be more open and encouraging of this technology, people are going to flock there. So that might be the answer, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think about what I want to say and don't want to say.
Be careful. They're listening.
I know. We're all listening. I think like the governments could be disrupted, right?
Yeah.
And that might be a good thing. Because while things might seem stable from the outside, I feel like we're 10 mouse clicks from collapse.
Yeah, and maybe it would be safer in the hands of many, right? If it was distributed.
I don't know if that's true either, but
Right.
I think regardless, at least in the United States, a lot of what government originally used to be is now privatized.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a problem. So either this forces government to be government again, which I think could be good, or, it creates its own governance system and sovereignty.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, I think it's a good thing, although I think in the short run, it could be hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there will be some turmoil probably. But amazing conversation. So much to think about. You guys are so awesome. And I would love to have you guys back to talk more.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Could talk for hours, especially with wine, right?
Oh, this is the best. Friday at 5:30 with some old vine Zinfandel.
Yeah, this
from
is
Dry
from
Creek.
Equality Vines. Actually, they give a percentage of their revenues back to equality-based causes.
Oh, well, they should be a sponsor.
They're a sponsor of Latina Geeks, actually. So this is
great.
a bottle left over from the Latina Geeks
Perfect.
event. Yes. But thank you guys so much for joining. And if people want to find you, tell us how they can find you. Obviously, Blockchain for Good is an amazing Facebook group.
Yeah, there's a Facebook group, Blockchain for Good. Also find us at blockchainforgood.us. And if you want to start a city group with events, there's a way to do that on there. We have an account that allows to create all different groups in all different cities. If you're interested in the blockchain code of ethics, go to blockchaincodeofethics.com. If you're interested in blockchain marketing, Blox7, Blox with the number 7.com. And if you want to look at my work and previous work, it's rustrum.com, which is my last name.
Amazing. What about you, David?
Awesome. You can find everything and more about Deconet at our website, which is deco.network. And I'm on Twitter at Dave Sneider, DAVESNEIDER, mainly tweeting about blockchain things, occasionally things about outer space and science and random other stuff too.
I love it. Do you believe in aliens?
Yeah, that's me. Do I believe in aliens? This one might even take longer than the government question.
It's just a simple yes or no.
Well, do I believe aliens have contacted Earth? No.
Exist.
But do I believe aliens exist in the universe?
Is something alive outside of the heliosphere of Earth?
Yes, but then the question comes up: how do you define life, right?
Yes or no?
Did
David tell you about his galactic tick day?
Okay, I'll end on that.
Oh, okay.
I created a holiday. It's a holiday that celebrates the motion of the solar system around the Milky Way. It takes 230 million years for our solar system to do a galactic year. And it's galactictick.com, and it's celebrated every 1/100th of an arc second of that motion of the solar system around the Milky Way. And we have a party in SF every year. We had 200 people.
What?
And
When's
by the way,
party?
you got press all over
I'm coming.
mainstream
When's the
press
next
for
party?
this thing.
The next one is
I want to dress.
blurbs, the
I have
whole
an
nine.
alien outfit.
Attire for this. Is it Santa Claus outfits like SantaCon?
No, it's I don't know. We're
galactic.
We're
I have a
bootstrapping
galactic
holiday.
outfit. I totally have a galactic outfit.
Of course
I'm
you
ready.
do.
We're bootstrapping a holiday. The rituals are still in the midst of being established.
Ooh,
so it's a
okay, so
collaborative effort.
We're going to stay tuned for that. I cannot wait. Thank you guys so much. Awesome conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This
Thanks
is
for
awesome.
having us.
So delightful.
Yay. Bye.
Bye.